Welcome to Melachim Bet, chapter 13, perek Yud Gimel. Every season comes to its end, and in this perek we say goodbye to our very beloved friend and miracle worker, Elisha. So we had the chapter that discussed King Yoash, the one who ruled at the age of 7 and then eventually was killed in a coup, and his son Amaziah then becomes king. Now shifting the camera to the kingdom of Yisrael, who is being really clobbered by Hazael, the king of Aram. You have now the current king of Israel. His name is Yehoachaz. I know it's confusing sometimes with all the names. And the Jews the kingdom of Israel just look to God and they say, God, help us. How could we even manage, even though they're idol worshippers and they've lost any semblance of connection to Jerusalem and to the kingdom of Yehuda, they're being just clobbered and it hurts. And so Hashem tells Yoachaz, Hashem sees their pain even though they're worshiping Avodah Zarah, and he says, you know what, I'm going to help these people, and the help does come. Yoachaz dies and his son is king. Yoash. Now again, it's confusing because there's also King Yoash who was in Yehuda, but this is King Yoash who's in Yisrael. And King Yoash is there, and he's in charge, and he goes for a meeting with Elisha, and Elisha tells him, listen, my friend, this is going to be my last round. And Yoash comes to visit, even though there's always all this friction between the kings and Elisha, because Elisha is telling them they're doing the wrong thing. King Yoash of Israel goes, and he goes and he visits. He pays the last visit to Elisha, who is sick and on his deathbed. And Elisha tells him, I want you to do something. I want you to take a bow and arrow. Can you imagine? Elisha is on his deathbed. They're in this room where Elisha's sick and dying. And he tells the king of Israel who's visiting him, take the bow and arrow that you usually use in combat and go to the window. Okay. King Yoash of Israel goes to the window. He tells him, now pull the way you pull when you're shooting your bow and arrow. He tells him to pull his bow and point it east. And he says, shoot it as far as you can. And he says, I want you to know that is a sign that you will win King Hazael. You'll blow him a hit. And then Elisha tells King Yoash of Israel, he tells him, I want you to now take a stack of your arrows from your case, the case that they have back there with the arrows. He says, I want you to take a stack of arrows and hit it on the floor. You know the way how we sometimes do on Hoshana Rabbah, you hit the aravas? So he says, I want you to take the stack and I want you to hit it on the floor. King Yoash does it. He hits 3 times. Elisha is furious. He tells him, if you would have done it 5-6 times, then that would have dealt an absolutely destructive and devastating blow to Aram, but now you'll only have a mild success against them. And indeed, that's exactly what happens. King Yoash goes for a battle with Aram, and he's able to repel those attacks, and he's able to restore some kind of sense of security to Israel, who, by the way, have been really destroyed and downgraded to some extent by the people of Aram, so much so that the Navi says there were only 50 chariots left in Israel. 10 chariots and 50 horsemen. Very, very few. The entire army was really restricted and downgraded by Aram. All right, unfortunately, Elisha dies and he's buried. Now, as you may remember from other chapters, Moab has always been a subordinate nation of Israel, and they always sent the taxes to Israel, and they were sort of a colony almost of Israel. But Moab start rebelling, and they come a battalion of Moabite army folks come to Israel, and they encounter, I hate to say this, a funeral. They run into a funeral, and everyone who's holding the body of the deceased drops it and runs away in fear of these Moabite horsemen. The place that they dropped the body happened to be the place where Elisha was buried. So the dead body that just died touched the bones of Elisha and came to life. So this is a posthumous miracle of Elisha after he died. By the way, some commentaries say that it's because the person who died was a wicked man, so Elisha didn't want him to be buried next to him. Others say he was a righteous man, I believe the husband of Huldah, the prophetess. But either way, Yehoash, king of Israel, is able to restore some sanity, some sense of security, and defeat Hazael, the king of Aram, who's been such a menace. And thank God, at the end of the chapter, Hazael, the king of Aram, dies to be succeeded by his son Ben Hadad. And that has been this chapter, the story of the death of Elisha, the story of Yoash, and the arrows being hit on the floor, the arrow being shot, the partial defeat of Aram. And that is this perek. Thank you for listening.